Well, it's time now for business, and for that I'm joined on set by Stephen Carroll from our business desk. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Caxton.
Now, we've been talking about this a fair bit today already. 6 months since France went into a nationwide lockdown in the face of the coronavirus pandemic. A move, of course, which had huge consequences for the French economy.
Overnight, you had massive sectors of the French economy totally shut down as essentially all but essential shops were closed. Strict lockdown lasted 2 months here, and even as measures were eased, you didn't have the economy return immediately to pre-pandemic levels. And still, there are many industries that continue to suffer. Think about tourism. That's 7% of France's GDP annually. When international travel stopped, that sector lost most of its business, and it's still in that situation 6 months on, with very little sign actually of that being able to recover, particularly when we think about travellers that are coming from further afield, from the likes of the US or China. All of that, a seismic shock for the French economy. It was played out almost immediately in economic figures. Lockdown happened in the middle of March, so economic figures are divided up into the quarters of the year. So the first 3 months of the year, those figures only covered 2 weeks of lockdown, but still the economy shrank by almost 6% in that period. Of course, the April to June period covered the majority of lockdown, a 14% contraction in economic activity, not seen since the Second World War in France, really a recession unprecedented in modern times. Overall, for the year now, we're expecting the French economy, according to the latest forecast from the French Central Bank, to shrink by almost 9%. That's actually better than some of the pictures we're getting from elsewhere. So that's an optimistic, would you believe, forecast that the 9% contraction in GDP. The French Central Bank again saying that they expect the rebound to happen of around 7% next year. That means the scars of this crisis will last for years to come.
And what has happened to jobs during this period?
So right at the start of the pandemic, the French government announced a blanket extension to its existing scheme of partial unemployment, or furlough. This is where the state steps in to pay the salaries of private sector workers who can't work. Now, it was a hugely important step to maintain jobs and crucially to maintain people's incomes during the peak of this crisis. The end goal to maintain consumer spending, which is the most important driver of the economy. Now, at its peak, the furlough scheme was requested to pay the salaries of more than half of France's private sector workforce. Efforts to promote retraining under the scheme, though, have produced mixed results. Luc Shrego has more now on that.
From empty offices to full-time work, at least for some in France. The government's still paying for over 2 million people on furlough, but some of those who've gone back to work took advantage of a programme for job retraining, like Aminata, who brushed up her English with her firm developing internationally.
Je suis obligée d'avoir aujourd'hui un niveau qui me permette de tenir une conversation, d'écrire des mails ou des synthèses qui soient lisibles d'un anglophone ou de quelqu'un qui ne parle pas forcément français.
20% of this firm's staff signed up for training, for which the French state footed the entire bill, for those who fell under its part-time working deal.
On avait un plan de formation ambitieux. Et au final, c'est le type de budget qui est un peu mis à mal quand il y a une incertitude d'un point de vue financier. Et du coup, ça nous a beaucoup aidé d'avoir la possibilité de continuer à former des collaborateurs pendant cette période.
Over 3 months, 170,000 people received some kind of training. Among the most popular, languages, IT, accounting and management skills. A windfall for firms specialising in training.
Nous avons pu limiter les pertes sur l'année. Grâce à ce dispositif, nous avons eu à peu près une centaine de demandes qui nous a permis de continuer à travailler à peu près normalement.
The government programme for those on reduced hours is still running, but from the beginning of November, it'll begin passing 20% of the cost of training back to firms.
And Stephen, just how effective has that programme been in saving jobs?
I mean, for the most part, it did what it was supposed to. It kept people off unemployment lists and in jobs until their companies were able to reopen after lockdown. Of course, there were still jobs lost over this period, particularly agency workers who just essentially saw their work dry up overnight. So in the first 6 months of this year, there were 650,000 jobs lost in the private sector. That's net job losses, so losses minus those jobs created. The latest forecast from the National Statistics Office expects the unemployment rate to rise to 9.5% by the end of this year. It's currently around 7%. The French Central Bank sees that continuing to rise in 2021 to over 11%. Now, again, the effects of the government support here have been key to sustaining jobs and sustaining businesses through the lockdown. The fear is that as that support is wound down, or businesses simply realise that they can't survive in normal business conditions, that's why we're expecting the situation to get worse before it gets better.
OK, well, in some other business news today, South Africa has announced that it's reopening its borders after 6 months.
President Cyril Ramaphosa made the announcement on that on Wednesday. He says the country will gradually and cautiously ease restrictions on international travel from the 1st of October. But journeys to countries with high infection rates of COVID-19 may still be restricted. Now, South Africa's tourist industry has been devastated by the lack of international visitors in recent months. Its economy shrank by 16% between April and June of this year.
Now, TikTok's troubles in the US might not be over despite a deal on the table with software giant Oracle. Tell me more.
So President Trump says that he's going to be fully briefed on this deal later this Thursday, but he's already said that he doesn't like that the US operations of the video sharing app aren't being entirely sold to Oracle. The current proposal would see the American firm take a minority stake in a new TikTok global company, which would still have China's ByteDance as its majority shareholder. Trump had originally set a deadline of this Sunday for TikTok's US operations to be sold or risk the app being banned. ByteDance, for its part, says the deal still needs to be approved from both the United States and China. Let's take a quick check on the markets for you next. The Federal Reserve's statement that it would keep interest rates low until 2023 dominating investors' minds today, although some disappointment in Asia that no new stimulus plans were announced by America's central bank. You can see falls across many of the main markets there, just the Shanghai Composite there managing to hit the flat line while falls elsewhere.
Now, Stephen, finally from you, Australia's Qantas has come up with an innovative new plan to boost sales after the pandemic grounded most of its international fleet.
So it's going to be a 7-hour scenic trip of Australia by air, of course. The flight will take off from Sydney. It'll visit Uluru, Byron Bay and the Great Barrier Reef. The tour will take place in a 787 Dreamliner and the prices will begin from 787 Australian dollars, which is around 490 euros. Passengers will also get to keep a pair of the airline's famed kangaroo pyjamas. All of this, of course, in an effort to stem the massive losses that Qantas has experienced in recent months. The strict quarantine rules in Australia have forced the airline to ground aircraft and cut jobs. Wondering if it can encourage people to spend 7 hours in a plane to arrive back from where you started from.
Maybe the pyjamas might just clinch it.
I think so, they might.
Stephen Carroll with a look at the day's business news. Thank you very much.